Of you and thank the organizers of APPI for inviting me. It looks like a very colorful inauguration to the start to the program. Start with I was given the topic on newer vistas in coagulometry, and I realized that coagulation is not a rampant practice in the country. We actually had a coagulation workshop yesterday, and I distributed the questionnaire much ahead before the workshop, but the response was good. So I thought that probably it may be appropriate to still talk about coagulation, because coagulometry has not taken huge leaps in our country, because if you look at high-end coagulation analyzers, only few centers in our country have it. But I think now a lot of medium-end analyzers are coming, which probably you need to, it's a connect between the low-end analyzers and the high-end. So some basic information about that. So I actually would bring the topic is simpler modifications make complex analysis possible. And that is our experience with Sysmex CS2000i in our institution. We have now had this instrument for over 3.5 years. And I've realized that we have been using coagulometers for so many years, but some simpler modifications in this coagulometer has made complex analysis quite eminently possible. Now, talking about history of coagulometers, it starts with early 1900s, starting with Slide's test, which observed fibrin and clotting. Then you had coagulometer in 1912, which measured clotting by using a plunger and temperature control. Quiggle-Mass used nephelometry in 1923, and Nygaard in 1939 used the photoelectric coagulometer, and Chandler used the Chandler loop in 1958. And it was Watt in 1970 which used the photooptical measurement of clotting. Then in the 1970s, new semi-automated equipment appeared based on photometric or mechanical principles to detect the fibrin clot. More recently, fully automated instruments have become common in modern laboratories with widespread use in most parts of the world. It has contributed to improvements in standardization and facilitating tests that demand specific training and specific working conditions, so that laboratories may improve their efficiency and repertoire of tests that can be made available to the clinicians. So the coagulometers generally that we have are basically those which do either clotting detection by photooptical or mechanical methods. They use chromogenic assays using the absorbance principle, and then you have the latex immunoassay, which can measure proteins quantitatively. So if you look at hemostasis as such, the hemostasis, if you want to test a patient who has come to you with a suspected increased tendency for bleeding, you need to test every aspect of the hemostasis. And there could also be patients who can be referred to you with problems of increased clotting, thrombosis. So a hemostasis testing is only completed when you can test for the clotting test, the thrombosis test, as well as the platelet test. And we know that for clotting tests, you have the PT, APTT, thrombin time, fibrinogen by the von Closs method, factor assays, inhibitor assays, and then von Willebrand's test. While thrombosis, you have got various thrombosis parameters as well as monitoring of anticoagulation. And for platelet function, you need to have aggregometry. And many of them require different devices. So what are the inadequacies in a coagulometer? Why is it not a complete hemostasiometer? I would say hemostasiometer is a machine which can do all the aspect of hemostasis. Now, when a patient has low fibrinogen or acquired dysfibrinoemias, which is not that uncommon, or hypofibrinoemias, there is a message that comes from coagulometer that no clot is detected. Then we also know that the physiology of coagulation has changed from the intrinsic and extrinsic pathway that was published in 1964 to what is known as the cell-based theory of hemostasis, and therefore we know that the clotting system is not physiological. It does not measure the clotting velocity. For example, a patient with hemophilia, if the clotting velocity was good, that means the thrombin was generated in a burst, that would help the clot formation. Unfortunately, they produce thrombin at a very, very slow rate. So the tests like PT and APTT will not be able to reflect the clotting acceleration as well as the velocity. And of course, we know that coagulometers cannot look for primary hemostasis tests like platelet function testing or tests for von Willebrand's factor like ristocytin cofactor assay. And other tests that is usually missed by coagulometers is factor 13, where most of the labs do the urea clot solubility test. So this is a new pathway of coagulation. Most of you have been exposed to this. You have the first step of initiation, that is the moment tissue factor is exposed, and it produces little amount of thrombin. This thrombin will take on to the next stage of amplification, and the amplification basically is because it is able to activate factor 5 and factor 8 on platelets along with activation of platelets, and activates factor 9. Now this activation allows the formation of important complexes called the prothrombinase complex and the tenase complex and prothrombinase complex, which produces 100,000 molecules of thrombin, which may actually be enough to form a clot. Therefore, not necessitating the need for the next step, which is propagation, that ensures further production of thrombin by the activated factor 11A that was activated initially. So this is a new pathway of the physiological pathway of coagulation, and all these pathways happen on a surface of a cell. That's why it's called cell-based theory of hemostasis. The cells could be an endothelial cell, it could be a platelets, or it could be a white cell. All these cells are rich in tissue factor, so they can only happen on a surface of a cell that has got tissue factor. So if you look at it carefully, the initiation is nothing but the old extrinsic pathway where tissue factor and factor 7A activates factor 10 to 10A. Amplification is nothing but the old common pathway. The old common pathway is basically the role of factor 10, 5, 2 and fibrinogen. But here you have an added participation from 8 and 9. And then you have propagation, which is nothing but the old intrinsic pathway with no factor 12 involved. So what are the newer innovations that we are trying to get into coagulometers, which may probably bring the test closer to physiology? You have the multi-wavelength detection system, the wavelength switching function, as well as the clot curve representation. So the multi-wavelength detection system is basically the fact that there are multiple wavelengths in a coagulometer, and there are selected wavelengths for certain methodologies. Like for clotting, it will be certain wavelengths, and for chromogenic assays, wavelengths are usually 405, and immunoturbidometric will be usually higher wavelengths. But the fact that these wavelengths are always present and may be selected for certain methodologies, but there is a possibility that the same wavelengths can be used for the same methodology. For example, if the clot detection does not happen at a particular wavelength, it can switch from that wavelength to the next wavelength. So you've got a range of wavelengths where clot detection can happen. So what we did was we looked at a normal plasma and saw how will a normal plasma behave in a particular wavelength. So we have, you can see here that we have recorded the clotting time of a normal plasma at 340 nanometers, 405 nanometers, 575 nanometers, 660 nanometers, and 880. And what we are looking at is not only the timings, which is on the table, but we are also looking at the shape of the clot that is formed after the time is produced. If you look at it subtly, you can find out that the curve is slightly sluggish in 800 compared to 340. 340 is slightly sharper in the way it turned, and why compared to the 800. Now, that is as far as normal plasma is concerned, but when you look at a hemophilic plasma where the aperiod is prolonged, also the hemophilic plasma is able to produce a curve, and you can see that as the wavelengths increases, the sluggishness of the curve increases. So that means at 340, the clotting will be detected at a faster rate compared to 800, where the 800 takes its own sweet time to understand the clotting process and record the clotting very well. This can be useful when you have low fibrinogen or abnormal fibrinogen, where the clotting process happens very slowly, so that if suppose the clotting is not detected at 575 nanometers, it can immediately go to 800 and probably record the process, thereby not having that irritating message called no clot detected. It will definitely give you a clot. So the important thing is, whenever you have a coagulometer which is able to have a screen and you are able to see the clot curve, it's a nice habit to look at the clot curve. Whenever you get a coagulometer, it's a nice habit to look at the clot curve, because it's probably a requirement for the validation process to see whether the APTT and the PT, when the clot is produced, it produces a very neat curve, and there is no background noise. If the background noise is there, probably you can actually have an indirect check on the optics of the whole system. So what happens in many of the coagulometers is that when the clotting happens in the coagulometer, there is a lot of small fibrin monomers that are produced, which actually are not precipitated, but they will be partially precipitating. And therefore, as the clot starts forming, before forming itself, it produces a lot of background noise. And if you look at the background noise, it looks quite dirty on the clot curve representation. So what the machines do is they take a mathematical averaging of the whole signals that are detected by the machine, and they use an algorithm called the clot curve smoothing, the curve smoothing software, and they actually output what is known as the smoothened curve, so that the curve looks much neater without any background noise, especially when you have a photo-optical system which actually is based on transmittance. And if you choose between light scatter, transmittance, or say absorbance, the transmittance is very sensitive. It's probably the most sensitive, and therefore it has a risk of having a lot of background noise. But using a software which removes the background noise, it basically eliminates the problem of background noise and retains the sensitivity of the clot detection. So we have now the clot curves on 3 patients here. The pool normal plasma is giving 34.3 seconds, while the other 2 plasmas are giving abnormal times. And you can see that the sluggish, as the time gets abnormal, the sluggishness of the curve is also slightly high. And you actually find out that these patients which are having abnormal times are patients with hemophilia with a factor VIII level of 1.5, that's moderate hemophilia, and the other one is less than 1% severe hemophilia. So basically you can get some idea that if a patient is not severe hemophilic, probably the APTT timings may be shorter compared to the severely prolonged times in severe hemophilic, as well as the fact that the curve you can see is probably slightly sharper. But at the same time, I have got a set of patients here, 6 patients, all of them are severe hemophilics. All of them have less than 1%. And if you look at their APTT timings, they are all over the place, ranging from 98.4 to almost 228 seconds. At the same time, if you look at the shape of the clot curve, it's different. Doesn't mean that 228 clot curve may be more sluggish than probably the 98.4. In fact, if you look at it, 98.4 looks very sluggish compared to the 228 seconds clot curve. So this basically could be a tool to identify phenotypic heterogeneity in severe hemophilia. We know that all severe hemophilics don't bleed. About 10 to 15% who have no factor VIII hardly bleed. So is this one simple method of identifying those patients who hardly bleed? Now coming back to these patients again, here you have patients with various degrees of factor VIII deficiency, 6.8%, factor VIII of 3.3%, factor VIII of less than 1%, and